It's lesson 8, part 2. We've set up our app with register and login links, which don't look very good right now. We'll deal with that later. So inside of our index.js, we now need, I'll put it underneath my post, my get handler. So post /register. So what happens when a user fills out this form? We're going to write a post handler. Now this one's going to be a little different. Our code for this, rather than dealing with the request and response, we're going to use Passport to handle this stuff. We're going to use, actually, before we can do that, sorry, I'll just put a comma here. We now need to make a reference to Passport in here because we want Passport to handle user creation and authentication. So up at the top, we'll need 2 references. We also need a reference to our user model because we need the user model to use Passport Local Mongoose to save this person to the database. So previously, you know, we had the cars controller using the car model, the makes controller using the makes model. In this case, it's okay. We need the user model right in our root controller, our index controller. So we're going to need both of these in order to create a user. Sorry. So now in here, sorry, we need Passport for the login. But we are going to have request response next. Sorry, I misspoke. So our model has a built-in register method. So we're going to create a new user and set up our username from our form. Now, interestingly enough, we don't supply the password here. The password is supplied as a separate parameter. We don't put the password in as part of this user object. You'll see what I mean in a minute. And then our callback, where we either get an error or a user back. So why do you suppose this password is passed in as a separate property? Like we create the user object and we pass in a username. Why don't we stick the password in here as well? Why is the password passed in separately? Rob? Right, because this value is going to get hashed. So again, you had asked the question, Rob, I think earlier about, well, what if we want to customize a user? Like we want to add things like address, phone number, email address, for example. Well, those things would go in here because those are just plain text properties we're passing to our user model if we define them in the user model. But the password we have to treat separately because Passport is going to hash that. So our register method takes 3 parameters: the user object with any properties, the password so it can be not only hashed, but it's also going to salt it, much the way ASP.NET Identity did. What's the value of salting the password, not just hashing it? Why don't we just hash it? Right, it uses a random string to generate a unique hash value. So if we all sign up with the same password, our password all gets stored differently. And then lastly is our callback, so it returns something to us. So in here, if we get an error, we can log it. Otherwise, well, what should we do if we can create them successfully? Where should we take them? Okay, so we could take them to the cars page. The other thing we want to do is not just take them to the cars page, but we're going to use Passport to log them in. One thing I find annoying when I register and you confirm my identity, I hate having to then log in. If I've just signed up and you've approved my account, just log me in. So if it's successful, we want to automatically log the user in and direct/cars. So let's do that. Let's not make them sign up and then have to log in. So we can use Passport for this. We just call request.login. We pass in user object. Whoops, I did this wrong. Sorry. That's better. So log them in and show them the cars page. This may not work right away. We'll see if this works. For the moment, we may just have to manually use res.redirect to /cars. We'll try this. So let's try and sign up, and then we'll go and look in our MongoDB if it works, and we'll see what's in there. So right now, actually, I may as well look in MLab right now. I'll just sign in quickly. You may want to do the same so you can look at your database. See what's going on here. So I'll open up my car tracker. So interesting, we actually have a users collection already, but it's empty. Doesn't really matter whether it's there. Again, we don't have to define a schema. It's one of the great things about NoSQL database. Doesn't matter if there's anything in there, there's any structure whatsoever. No problem. So we'll try and sign up, see how we do. So I'll load register. I'll enter in a password. Now, right now, there are no password restrictions. We probably want to add that. That might be something we do next week. Let's see what happens. If this works, I should get the cars page. And then if we go to MLab, we should see that I have a user in a user document in the users collection. So we'll try this. Okay, so it's saying Passport initialize is not in use. When we've tried to log the user in, it failed. I think it did create our account, however. I'm going to go look in MLab and refresh. So my sign up worked, my redirect didn't work. When I look in the users table, here's what we get. So I have a unique identifier. It saved my email address. It saved the salt value. And you can see the password is well hashed. That's a pretty strong password. If I create another user account and put in the exact same password, I'll have a different salt and a different hash in the database. So it did work. We've got to figure out what happened with our, yep.
What is salt value? Password or?
Okay. If we hash password, so let's say you and me, we go to the same website and we both enter this as our password. Right? So you enter this. I enter the exact same password. If all we do is hash it, then your password turns into this, right? So it's hashed, so no one can read it. The problem is most websites, they use the same hash method. So when they hash my password, if someone looks in the database or hacks our database, they're going to see that our password's actually the same. And if they can figure out how the hashing worked, they can figure out our password. So this isn't the most secure, right? Because we may have many people putting in the same password. And then in the database, they're all stored with the exact same value. So what salting does, and we're actually using salting, so it's another random string, right? So I'm going to go and create another user again, but I'm going to put in the same password that I did for my first user, okay? So yeah, it crashed. I'll have to... Well, that's interesting. The user with the given username is already registered. Gave me a user exists error. Interesting. Let me go back here. So I'll create a different account. But I'll use the same password. Yes, so notice also passport checked for a unique username. Throws an error. So I put in the same password for two accounts. So now I have Rich and I have ABC. I put in the same password on the form, but notice I have a different salt value. This one starts with 6A, this one starts with 7.5. And then if you look at the password values, they're totally different. So rather than simply hashing, if we first salt it, it takes a random string and it uses that string as part of the hash process. So now instead of getting this, we get that result, where even though I put the same password in for each user, it looks totally different. So this is much more secure. So salting generates a random string, and then we use that string in creating a hash value. Okay, so it's extra security. Does that make sense? Okay. So I'll have to take this part out for now because obviously we're having a little issue here. Rather than log the user in, maybe for now what I'll have to do is just redirect them to the login page instead. Not ideal, but I'll create one more account and I should just get the login page. Obviously, we can see that our user.register is with Passport and Passport Local Mongoose, it's working, right? It's creating an account. And we haven't had to define any of these properties in our model. So username, salt, and hash, these are obviously built into Passport Local Mongoose for us. Now, if we wanted on our register form, things like, you know, birth date, email address, phone number, we would then have to do a couple of things. So Rob, this comes back to your question earlier. We would then need to define any additional properties in our model. Yeah, so then just like, so, you know, we'd have phone string with the message, email type string, any other properties that we need for users, we have to custom define them here. And then, so let's do that. Let's maybe add a phone field. We'll do it just so we can see how it works. Okay. So let's say in here we want a phone, which is a string. We won't make it required. We'll just leave it as optional. So a user doesn't have to give us their phone number, but they could. So now we need a field for it on our register form, right? We need a place for the user to supply the phone number. So on here, I'm actually going to change my label from username. I'll change that to email and maybe also change my type here to email. So users have to supply an email address as a username. Can't just type in ABC as a username. And now I'll add one more field set here. If you want to copy and paste, you can. I'll actually type it out. Underneath my confirm box, I'll put on a field set with another label and input pair. I'll use type equals tell, not required. So now our model has a space to save a phone number. Our register form has a place for a user to supply a phone number. So what's the one thing we still need to do? How do we connect the view, the phone number in the view, to the phone number in the model? Yeah, so in our controller method, when we post the form, we're going to add it to this list here. So we're setting the username, and now we'll add the phone as request.body.phone. So now we're customizing what Passport gives us, just in a very simple way by adding one property. Obviously, we could add as many properties as we want. If we have a really big registration form, because we need lots of info from people, that's fine. We just add more fields to the form, add them into our controller, and add those fields to our model. So now I should be able to register one more time, but I should be able to save a phone number if I provide one. So it's added to our model in the schema. It's added to our view with a new text box, and it's added in our controller when we create the new user. So I'm going to go ahead and try this, and hopefully we can now create, obviously something up in my view. I put in 3 rather than 2. I should be able to create one more user. Keep my same password again, why not? Storing it as a string, so it'll just store the dashes, not treating it as a number. So we'll see what happens if I sign up now. Okay, so I got directed to login, which is okay for now. And now if we look, we now have an additional property for this document that those first 2 don't have. So simple enough to customize. What Passport gives us something to work with, and then we can add in any additional information we want our users to tell us. Give them an input on the view, give them a field, add a field in the schema, and make sure you pass those values to the model. So that sort of answer your question about how we would do it. So the last thing we'll do for today, and then we'll leave off. I know there's some cleanup items we should do. I haven't really fixed the nav bar. We didn't automatically log the users in. We haven't required any sort of strong passwords on the front end. We could maybe add some of that stuff next week. So the last thing we want to deal with is we want a post method to log users in. So I'll add a post here at /login. Then we'll also need to, once we log in, we'll need to be able to secure either certain links or certain views. We'll do that next week. We'll write a post handler at /login. So this is the one that's different. We're not using request response and next here. When we get a post handler, what we're going to do is use passport and call the authenticate method. And we have to provide a few things to authenticate. The first one is, what type of authentication are we doing? What strategy? Well, in this case, we're doing local authentication. Later on, next week, we'll write methods, a Google a method that authenticates with Google, another method that authenticates with Facebook. We're authenticating, and then we need to set up 3 simple parameters. First one is called success redirect. Should be pretty clear what that means. Where do we take someone if Passport can successfully find them? We have a failure redirect. I'm on the login page. So we'll start with this. The other thing we'll need if they log in unsuccessfully is we're going to need a way to display a message to the user. But for now, we'll just keep them on the login page if they can't log in. We'll take them to cars if they can. Sorry, there is, so let's just, yeah, we'll leave it for now and then we'll deal with the messages in a minute. So that's pretty simple. Just tell Passport to basically try and do this. And take the user here if it works and take them there if it doesn't. So let's see what happens. So if I put in, actually I'll put in an invalid login first. And it redirects me back here. Now, we haven't given the user any indication the login failed, so we'll need to deal with that. But at least it recognized that that credential wasn't valid. What if I put in a valid credential? Then we get this. Okay, so we're almost there. It recognized me, right? It knew that I was right. It just hasn't, I had a problem trying to initialize Passport and store my identity, and we're having a little issue here. So let's look at why. We're almost there. Let's see what else. We referenced our model. We created our strategy. You may have to look back at the Passport docs. So the login part is okay. It's that our identity is not being stored properly. Passport.initialize and passport.session. I think we have these things. Maybe they've changed this a little bit. Let's try here. So this is being recognized. Passport.passport. They may have changed this a little bit. When I do it this way, it seems to recognize maybe a session is getting recognized. Hold on a minute. I don't know if this will solve our problem. We'll see. No. Not a method. Now, in our example, they don't actually. Okay, to use passport. I'm going to try one other thing. Wonder what happens if I take these two lines right out. They should be required. I may have to solve this one after class and we'll resume it next week. I'll just take it right out. So it tells us it's not in use. And even when we add it, I'm using NodeMon. So it is restarting. That's interesting. Obviously, I've missed something in our setup. Let's see. So this is what we've done. Oh, the issue may be the order of things. Passport initialize and passport session. It may be that we have to make this, may just be an order thing. I think this line may have to go above these two. That might be the problem, that it's just in the wrong order. At first, we have to use express session and set it up. think that might be the problem. Then we can call initialize in session. Nope. So we're using the cookie parser, which we need. We'll have a look. Okay, I'll have to compare this to what I've done previously, but as far as I can tell, it's pretty much the same. Initialize passport session. Okay, I'm sure it's something small in our configuration. So I will sort that issue out. And I will either post it and let you know when it's posted. We'll definitely go over it the start of class next week. Okay? So then we can finish off our login. And once we're able to log in, we'll need to be able to display error messages here. So we're going to need to use the session to be able to do that. We'll stick an error message in the session, and then when our form loads, we can check if there are any error messages, and if so, we can show them in an alert up here. So we'll do that next week. We'll need to fix the formatting of our nav bar as well. We'll want to change these links. So these links are going to be invisible to anonymous users, and these links will be invisible to logged in users. And when someone logs in, we'll display their username up here in the nav bars. People would kind of typically expect to see. Then we also have to give them easy way to log out. So we'll do that next week, and then we'll do social authentication as well. So there's no quiz, but we have a lot to do, so we'll do that starting right at 8 next week. Okay. I do have